The story of Achilles begins not in the clash of spears nor in the walls of Troy, but in the way human beings remember. To speak his name is to summon echoes, echoes that have survived through poems recited by firelight, through scrolls carried across empires, through marble carved by the hands of sculptors who never saw him, but who believed in his image all the same. When we invoke Achilles, we do not simply recall a warrior. We awaken a cultural memory older than recorded history, a memory that asks us to consider who we are and what we might become. For more than 3,000 years, Achilles has been the standard by which heroes are measured. His story stands at the heart of the Trojan War cycle, the great myth that defined the Greek imagination, and, through it, much of Western storytelling. And yet, when we look closely, we find a paradox. The Iliad, the most famous account of Achilles, tells us almost nothing about his birth, little about his youth, and nothing of his death. It is a poem of absence as much as presence. Homer chooses to enter the tale when Achilles is already grown, already a warrior, already burdened by pride. The Iliad is not a biography, but a snapshot, a glimpse into a few weeks of wrath and grief. And so, to understand Achilles fully, we must step beyond Homer. We must gather fragments from Hesiod, from Pindar, from the tragedians Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides. We must listen to the later echoes in Roman poets, Virgil, Ovid, Statius, who reshaped him for their own empires and audiences. We must even turn to the scholars of Byzantium and the Renaissance, who interpreted Achilles anew for their own times. What emerges is not a single story, but a mosaic, sometimes contradictory, sometimes bewildering, but always compelling. At the heart of this mosaic lies a tension, Achilles as man and Achilles as myth. Was he a figure born of history, dimly remembered, a warrior who fought in a distant Bronze Age war and whose deeds were inflated by song? Or was he always a creation of the imagination, a vessel into which cultures poured their anxieties and aspirations about mortality, glory, and the wrath of men? The answer, perhaps, is both. Consider the qualities that defined him. He was said to be faster than any other mortal, swift of foot, able to chase down even the mightiest foes. He was stronger, fiercer, his very presence on the battlefield enough to terrify enemies. And yet he was not invulnerable, not in the earliest myths. The tale of his mother dipping him into the river Styx, rendering his body impervious save for his heel, is a later invention, absent from Homer, absent from Hesiod. In the oldest accounts, Achilles bleeds like other men, and his strength comes not from magical protection but from a divine inheritance tempered by mortal flesh. His greatness then was not in being untouchable, but in being all too vulnerable, and in choosing to face that fate head-on. That choice, the choice between a long, uneventful life and a short life of immortal fame, is the essence of his legend. It is the dilemma that haunted Greek thought. For the Greeks, glory was not measured by the number of years one lived, but by the brilliance of those years, by whether they would be remembered after death. Achilles becomes the archetype of this ethos, the man who knowingly trades longevity for renown, whose name will outlive him even as his body perishes young. It is a bargain both terrifying and seductive, and it has echoed through centuries of warriors, poets, and rulers who looked to Achilles as their model. Even Alexander the Great, 2,000 years after the supposed fall of Troy, carried with him a copy of the Iliad, calling it his Manual of War. He made pilgrimage to Achilles' supposed tomb at Troy, offering sacrifice to the hero and claiming him as kin. For Alexander, Achilles was not merely a character in a poem. He was a blueprint for greatness, a reminder that destiny favors those who are willing to burn brightly and briefly. But Achilles is not only about glory. He is also about wrath, about the consuming fire of anger that blinds even the noblest of men. The Iliad begins not with his birth, nor with the launching of ships, but with a single word. Sing, goddess of the wrath of Achilles. This choice tells us everything. For Homer, Achilles is not defined solely by strength or speed, but by his capacity for rage, a rage so intense it reshapes the fate of nations. And yet even this wrath is inseparable from grief, from love, from the vulnerability of a man who loses what he cherishes most. It is this complexity, this weaving together of triumph and tragedy, that makes Achilles timeless. He is not a simple hero, nor a flawless demigod. He is prideful, stubborn, sometimes cruel. But he is also capable of tenderness, of tears, of mercy. When he finally meets King Priam, the father of the man he has slain, and returns to him the body of Hector, we glimpse something deeper than rage. We glimpse empathy, the recognition of shared suffering between enemies. That moment, quiet and human, is as unforgettable as any duel or victory. Achilles' story also forces us to reckon with the role of fate. Again and again, the myths remind us that his death was foretold before his birth. No matter how he fought, no matter how he lived, the end was sealed. The Greeks did not see this as cruelty, but as truth. That all men, even those born of gods, are bound by mortality. What matters, then, is not escape, but how one meets that destiny. Achilles, in embracing his fate, becomes more than mortal. In choosing to shine brilliantly for a short span, he attains what no god can have, the immortality of memory. And so his legacy endures. We find him in Homer's poetry, in Virgil's Aeneid, in Dante's Divine Comedy. We see him painted on ancient amphorae, carved into sarcophagi, sculpted in Renaissance marble. He reappears in modern novels, films, even in the language of medicine, where the Achilles tendon still reminds us of the vulnerable heel. His shadow stretches across time, binding us to an age of myth and to questions that remain as urgent now as they were then. Why does Achilles still matter? Because he is us. He is the embodiment of our longing to be remembered, of our struggle with pride and grief, of our desire to transcend limits even as we know we cannot escape them. His story reminds us that to be human is to live in tension with fate, to fight, to love, to rage, to fall, and to be remembered. And so, with the weight of prophecy and the echo of glory, we turn now to the beginning, to the sea goddess who sought to shield her child, to the mortal king who dared to wed her, to the prophecies that foretold a son who would surpass all men, but who would never escape death. The stage is set. The world awaits. The child of Thetis and Peleus will soon be born, and with him, the greatest hero of the age. In the beginning, before Achilles was even conceived, the threads of his fate were already being woven. His story did not emerge from chance, but from a union between gods and mortals, a marriage destined to ripple through the ages. To understand the life of Achilles, we must first step back into the courts of Olympus and the councils of the gods, where whispers of prophecy carried weight greater than armies. The tale begins with Thetis, a sea goddess of extraordinary beauty and power, daughter of the ancient sea deity Nereus and one of the 50 Nereids. The gods themselves desired her, for her radiance was said to rival the very light of dawn. Zeus, king of the Olympians, longed to claim her as his own, but prophecy stood in the way, for it was foretold that Thetis would bear a son greater than his father. If she were to wed a god, that son might rise to surpass even Zeus himself, threatening the cosmic order. To prevent this, Zeus decreed that Thetis would not marry among the immortals. Instead, she was given to a mortal man, Peleus, king of Phthia, a respected warrior in his own right, but no match for the immortals who had once pursued her. This union of divine and mortal was not simple. Thetis resisted the match, fleeing and transforming into fire, water, even wild animals to escape Peleus's grasp. But the mortal king, aided by wisdom from the gods, held fast until she relented. Their marriage was celebrated with grandeur upon Mount Pelion, attended by gods and goddesses, heroes and kings. Yet even at this joyous feast, shadows of fate lingered. It was here that the goddess Eris, uninvited and resentful, cast the golden apple inscribed with the words, "To the fairest." From this act would arise the quarrel between Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite, judged by the Trojan prince Paris, a quarrel that would set in motion the war where Achilles would meet his fate. Thus, from the very moment of his parents' union, destiny had already begun to weave him into the fabric of Troy's destruction. When Achilles was born, the world seemed to tremble with possibility. The child of a goddess and a mortal, he embodied two realms at once. Thetis, knowing the prophecy of her son's fate, sought to protect him. In some traditions, she anointed him with ambrosia and placed him in the fire to burn away his mortality, interrupted only when Peleus cried out in fear. In others, she carried him to the underworld's river Styx, plunging him into its dark waters so that no weapon could pierce his flesh. Only the spot by which she held him, his heel, remained untouched, vulnerable. This tale of the Styx is not Homeric. It appears later in Roman accounts and medieval retellings, reflecting how myths evolve across time. In Homer's Iliad, Achilles bleeds as other men bleed. He is not shielded by magical invulnerability, but rather by the sheer force of his spirit and skill. And yet, the story of the Styx endured, for it gave physical form to what was always true, that no matter how great, every hero has a weakness. Achilles grew in Phthia, the land ruled by his father, surrounded by wealth and warriors. Yet his mother, immortal and restless, never fully belonged to this mortal realm. She often returned to the sea, leaving Achilles between two worlds. He was neither fully of the earth nor fully of the waves, but something greater, something destined. Prophecy continued to shape his path. The seer Calchas had foretold that Troy could never fall without Achilles. Another oracle declared that if he remained at home, he would live a long but unremarkable life. If he went to Troy, he would win eternal glory, but perish young. These words hung over him from the start, framing every choice not as freedom, but as destiny. And yet, despite these heavy portents, the child Achilles was like any other, at least for a time. He was curious, restless, filled with energy. But unlike other children, he possessed extraordinary gifts. His speed was unmatched, his strength evident even in youth. By the time he could walk, it was said he ran faster than deer. By the time he could wield a weapon, no boy of his age could match his blows. The very essence of the warrior already burned within him. There is another story, a strange and secretive chapter of his youth that speaks to the lengths Thetis went to shield her son from fate. Some accounts tell us that when Achilles was older, as war loomed, Thetis hid him on the island of Scyros, disguised as a maiden among the daughters of King Lycomedes. She hoped that, hidden in women's clothes, he would never be found, never be called to Troy. Yet even in disguise, destiny sought him out. For it was Odysseus, master of cunning, who uncovered the truth. Disguised as a merchant, Odysseus brought fine jewelry and women's gifts to the daughters of Lycomedes, but also laid out weapons among them. While the others reached for gold and silk, Achilles' hand instinctively seized the sword. In that moment, his fate was sealed. The myths of Achilles' youth are many and varied, scattered across sources, each offering a glimpse of a boy caught between protection and inevitability. But they all circle the same truth. Achilles was never meant for obscurity. The prophecies, the disguises, the river, the attempts of his mother to shield him, all failed. From his first cry, he was bound to glory, bound to tragedy, bound to a war that had not yet begun but already awaited him. And so before the first ship sailed, before the first spears clashed on Trojan soil, the legend of Achilles was already being written. The boy who could not be hidden, the demigod who could not escape prophecy, was preparing to become the hero whose name would outlast the fall of empires. As Achilles grew, it became clear that his gifts required shaping, for raw strength without wisdom is as dangerous as it is powerful. In the Greek imagination, the training of a hero was never merely a matter of sharpening blades or drilling with spears. It was the crafting of a whole being, mind, body, and spirit, so that the warrior might embody not only the force of war, but the ideals of civilization. And for Achilles, this education was entrusted to one of the most remarkable figures in all of myth, the wise centaur Chiron. Unlike other centaurs who were often depicted as wild, drunken, and violent, Chiron was a being of rare balance. Born of Cronus and the sea-nymph Philyra, he carried both divine and bestial heritage, But unlike his kin, he was civilized, noble, and steeped in wisdom. On the slopes of Mount Pelion, he served as teacher to generations of heroes. Jason, who would later seek the Golden Fleece, learned from him. So did Perseus, Theseus, and even Heracles, whose strength rivaled the gods themselves. To Chiron came the young Achilles, and under his tutelage, the boy began to become the man who would shake the world. Here, in the wild yet sacred landscapes of Thessaly, Achilles was taught the art of war. He learned to wield the spear with deadly precision, to master the bow, to fight with sword and shield until his movements became as natural as breath. But Chiron's lessons went beyond combat. He trained Achilles to run swifter than any beast, to leap ravines, to wrestle lions and bears. Each test was not only of muscle, but of courage, for Chiron knew that bravery is not the absence of fear, but the mastery of it. Yet even as Achilles' strength grew, Chiron tempered him with softer lessons. He was taught music, the lyre's gentle strings beneath his calloused fingers, so that he might know the harmony that war so often destroys. He was taught medicine, the healing arts, for the Greeks believed the true warrior must also be a healer, able to bind the wounds he inflicted on others, or those suffered by his own companions. This duality, the hand that strikes and the hand that heals, was essential, and Achilles absorbed it deeply. In time he would become as skilled with herbs and salves as he was with spear and sword, embodying a paradox, the most fearsome warrior, yet also a physician of battlefields. Chiron also schooled him in philosophy and the great questions of life and destiny. What is glory? What is the duty of a man to his comrades, to his people, to the gods? Achilles grew not only into a fighter but into a thinker, a man who understood the heavy burden of the path laid before him. Perhaps it was here, in these quiet lessons beneath the trees of Pelion, that he first heard the whispers of his fate, the choice between a long, unremarkable life and a short one crowned with eternal renown. Accounts of Achilles' youth under Chiron vary, scattered like fragments across the tapestry of Greek literature. Some say he hunted relentlessly, mastering not only weapons but the wild itself. Others tell of his compassion, how he would stop to tend to animals he had wounded, reflecting that dual gift of healer and destroyer. But all agree on this: Chiron shaped Achilles into something more than mortal training could have achieved. He gave him not only skill but purpose, preparing him for the storm that would one day engulf Troy. It is worth pausing here to reflect on the significance of this mentorship. In myth, education is often as symbolic as it is practical. To place Achilles with Chiron is to suggest that his destiny was both wild and civilized, brutal and wise. The centaur embodied the union of opposites, and in Achilles those opposites would meet once more: the savagery of battle and the tenderness of love, the inevitability of death and the longing for immortality. And yet, despite Chiron's wisdom, there was a fire in Achilles that could not always be contained. The boy's temper was fierce, his pride already visible. There are tales that even in youth he would erupt in anger when slighted, a storm of emotion as quick as his famed speed. Chiron, it is said, warned him of this flaw, teaching him the dangers of wrath. But prophecy hung over them both, for no training, no wisdom, could ever fully shield Achilles from the destiny that awaited him. Still, in these formative years, we glimpse the making of the hero. Here is the child of prophecy, molded by the wisest of teachers, his hands as skilled at soothing wounds as at delivering death, his mind sharpened by philosophy as much as by steel. He was not yet the warrior who would stand at Troy, not yet the figure whose wrath would alter the fate of nations. But in the caves and forests of Pelion, in the lessons of Chiron, Achilles was forged like bronze in the fire, tempered, strengthened, prepared. In time, Chiron released him to the world, as he had with so many other heroes. But none of those pupils would burn as brightly, or as briefly, as Achilles. For though he left Pelion with unmatched skill, the shadow of prophecy followed him still, and as the tides of fate began to shift toward Troy, his name would soon be called. The world into which Achilles emerged from Chiron's tutelage was already stirring with conflict. Across the Aegean, stories were beginning that would entangle gods and mortals alike. drawing entire kingdoms into a war destined to last 10 years and become the greatest saga of the Greek imagination. For Achilles, the call to war was not a simple summons. It was the fulfillment of prophecy, the moment where choice and fate collided. The spark of the Trojan War lay, as so many great tragedies do, in a single moment of pride and desire. At the wedding of Peleus and Thetis, the very union that had given birth to Achilles, discord had been sown when Eris, goddess of strife, cast her golden apple to the fairest. Hera, queen of the gods, Athena, goddess of wisdom and war, and Aphrodite, goddess of love, each claimed it. Their quarrel was brought before Zeus, but he, wary of judgment, passed the decision to immortal Paris, a prince of Troy. Each goddess offered him a gift. Hera promised power, Athena promised wisdom and victory in war, Aphrodite promised the love of the most beautiful woman in the world. Paris chose Aphrodite, and so won Helen, queen of Sparta, wife of Menelaus. Her abduction, whether by love or by force, lit the fire that would engulf nations. Menelaus, humiliated and enraged, called upon the oath sworn by Helena's suitors, that all who had courted her would defend the marriage of the man she chose. Bound by this pact, the greatest kings and heroes of Greece were summoned. Agamemnon of Mycenae, brother to Menelaus, took command. Odysseus of Ithaca, cunning and reluctant, was drawn in. Ajax the Greater, Ajax the Lesser, Diomedes, and others gathered. But one truth soon became clear to the seers. Troy could not fall without Achilles. Here prophecy sharpened into necessity. Calchas, the prophet, declared that the Greeks' victory hinged on the presence of Peleus's son. Without him, their ships would founder, their spears would break, their hopes would vanish. Achilles, still young, still not yet 20, was thus bound to a war not of his making. But Thetis, his mother, knew what this meant. She had heard the prophecy at his birth. If he went to Troy, he would die young, though his name would live forever. If he remained, he would grow old, obscure, forgotten by history. Desperate to save him, she devised a ruse. She took him to the island of Scyros, to the court of King Lycomedes, and hid him among the maidens of the court. Disguised in women's clothes, Achilles lived in concealment, a lion wrapped in silk, a storm bound in calm. Yet even in disguise, his nature betrayed him. Legends tell that he could not entirely hide his strength, his stride, his restless energy. It was Odysseus who uncovered him. The Ithacan king, ever cunning, suspected that the boy was hidden on Scyros. Arriving in disguise as a merchant, he laid out gifts before the maidens, fine fabrics, jewels, perfumes, and among them, a sword and a spear. While the daughters of Lycomedes admired the trinkets, one figure instinctively reached for the weapons, his eyes alight with recognition. In that moment, Achilles revealed himself, and the fate his mother had tried so desperately to delay became inevitable. Some say Odysseus also tested him with a horn of war, sounding it suddenly through the palace. While the girls shrieked and fled, Achilles alone leapt up, weapon in hand, ready to fight an unseen enemy. The ruse was broken, the hero was found, and destiny reclaimed him. There are other stories of his time on Scyros, stranger, more human tales. Some traditions claim that Achilles took a lover among the maidens, perhaps even married Didamia, daughter of Lycomedes, and fathered a son, Neoptolemus, who would later join the war after his father's death. If this is true, then Achilles did not leave Scyros as merely a youth disguised, but as a father whose legacy would carry on in blood as well as in memory. With his disguise stripped away, Achilles had little choice. The summons to Troy was now inexorable. And though he knew what awaited him, though the shadow of his own early death loomed, he chose to go. It was not cowardice that defined him, but the longing for glory for Kleos, the eternal renown that outlives the flesh. This was the ethos of the age, and Achilles embodied it fully. He could not remain in obscurity. He would not be forgotten. He would burn brightly, even if briefly. As he prepared to sail, his mother gave him armor and a prophecy. She knew he would not return. Some say she wept as she bade him farewell, vanishing back into the sea, powerless to stop the tide of fate. Yet she also knew that her son's name would echo across eternity, that in choosing Troy, he would step into legend. And so Achilles joined the assembly at Aulis, where the greatest kings and heroes of Greece had gathered. There the fleet of 1,000 ships waited to sail against Troy. There he met Agamemnon, who would one day be both his commander and his enemy. There he met Odysseus not as trickster but as ally, and there his destiny became entwined with that of Patroclus, his closest companion, whose love and friendship would shape the very heart of his story. The call to war had been answered. The youth trained by Chiron, the boy hidden in silk, now stood revealed as the greatest warrior of his age. Ahead lay the shores of Troy, the clash of bronze, the fire of wrath, and the immortality of song. When Achilles set sail from Aulis with the vast armada of Greece, the sea seemed to tremble beneath the weight of destiny. The fleet numbered 1,000 ships, each bearing warriors who had sworn their oaths to Menelaus, each bound for Troy to reclaim Helen. Among them, none shone brighter than Achilles, still barely more than a youth but already spoken of as the greatest fighter alive. His presence gave courage to allies and fear to foes, for prophecy had declared that Troy's walls would not fall without him. The war did not begin at once with the famous siege. In its early years, the conflict was one of raids, skirmishes, and campaigns across the coasts of Asia Minor. The Greeks, under Agamemnon's command, spread destruction across Trojan-allied cities, seizing wealth, provisions, and captives. It was in these years, before the Iliad's events, that Achilles carved his reputation. Swift-footed and relentless, he struck where others faltered, his myrmidons following like a pack of wolves. Town after town fell before him, Tenedos, Lyrnessus, Pedasus, each conquest adding to his fame. The spoils of war were not only gold and livestock, but captives, women taken as prizes, symbols of status in the brutal economy of Bronze Age warfare. It was during these campaigns that Achilles claimed Briseis, the woman who would later become the spark of his great quarrel with Agamemnon. For now, though, she was a sign of his success, a token of his standing among the Greeks. Yet beyond plunder and conquest, these early years revealed Achilles' character in other ways. His bond with Patroclus deepened during the war's long grind. Patroclus, older and gentler by nature, tempered the younger hero's ferocity. Where Achilles was wrathful, Patroclus was compassionate. Where Achilles pursued glory, Patroclus cared for the suffering around him. Together, they embodied a partnership that was more than comradeship, perhaps more than friendship. The nature of their relationship has been debated for centuries, whether it was romantic, fraternal, or some fusion of both. But whatever its form, its strength was undeniable. Patroclus was Achilles' anchor, his confidant, the one who humanized him amid the savagery of war. The Greeks needed Achilles, and they knew it. Time and again he turned the tide of battle. His speed was legendary. Homer calls him swift-footed not once but repeatedly, a reminder that he was faster than any warrior alive. His spear struck with unerring force, his shield deflected blows that would have felled others. On the battlefield he seemed untouchable, not because of invulnerable flesh but because of a fire within him, a demigod's fury channeled through mortal arms. The Trojans came to dread the sight of his chariot, drawn by immortal horses, gifts from his father Peleus. Wherever Achilles rode, the earth shook with the cries of the fallen. And yet, even in victory, tensions brewed. The Greeks were not a single people but a coalition of kings, each jealous of his own honor, each unwilling to bow fully to another. At the head of this fractious host stood Agamemnon, proud and imperious, whose authority was constantly tested by the pride of his peers. Among them, none was prouder than Achilles. The seeds of their quarrel were planted long before it burst into flame. There were small slights, words exchanged, glances held too long. Achilles knew his worth, and he resented Agamemnon's arrogance. Agamemnon, in turn, envied Achilles' fame, the songs already rising about him. To command the Greeks was Agamemnon's right, but it was Achilles whom the men loved, Achilles whom they followed into battle with unshaken loyalty. In such soil, resentment grows quickly. The gods, too, watched closely, for this was no ordinary war, but one in which Olympus itself had taken sides. Hera and Athena favored the Greeks, bound by their hatred of Troy, and by the insult Paris had dealt them when he awarded the golden apple to Aphrodite. Aphrodite, in turn, defended the Trojans, especially Paris. Poseidon, who had once built the very walls of Troy, nursed old grudges and watched with interest. And Zeus, as always, sought to balance destiny, granting favor now to one side, now to the other. The gods moved among men in disguise, whispered in dreams, and turned the course of battles with invisible hands. Through it all, Achilles stood as both warrior and symbol. He was the blade of the Greeks, their most feared champion, but also their most volatile. Already his pride clashed with Agamemnon's authority. Already the war was not only against Troy but within the Greek camp itself, a struggle of honor as fierce as any fought on the field. And still the years dragged on. 9 long years of fighting wore down both sides. Cities were burned, fields laid waste, countless lives lost. The war became less about Helen, whose presence in Troy was more symbol than cause, and more about pride, vengeance, and survival. For Achilles, each campaign only burnished his legend. He became the terror of Troy, the name mothers used to frighten children into silence. His fame spread beyond the battlefield, across the Aegean, across the known world. Even those who would never see him in battle knew the name Achilles. But fame is a double-edged gift. With it comes expectation, envy, and the weight of destiny pressing ever closer. Achilles' victories could not shield him from prophecy. He might be the greatest warrior alive, but he was still mortal, still doomed to die young if he remained in Troy. Each passing year brought him nearer to that fate. And as the war entered its 10th year, as the Greeks grew restless and divided, the stage was set for the quarrel that would define his story. The wrath of Achilles, the turning point of the Iliad, and the event that would change the course of the Trojan War forever. For 9 years, Achilles had fought as the sharpest blade of the Greek host, his victories piling into legend, his very presence a terror to the Trojans. But in the 10th year of the war, a quarrel erupted, not with Hector, not with the sons of Troy, but with his own commander, Agamemnon. It is here, in this fracture between pride and authority, that the wrath of Achilles was born, a wrath so consuming that it threatened not only the Greeks' cause but the very order of fate itself. The spark came, as so often in war, from spoils of conquest. In one of the Greeks' raids, Agamemnon had taken as his prize a woman named Chryseis, daughter of a Trojan priest of Apollo. When her father came to ransom her back, bearing gifts and prayers, Agamemnon spurned him with insult. The priest turned to Apollo, who unleashed plague upon the Greek army, arrows of disease cutting through the camp. Desperate to save his men, the leaders convened a council. Calchas, the seer, revealed the truth. The only remedy was to return Chryseis to her father, without ransom, with honor. Agamemnon raged at the humiliation. To be forced to surrender his prize was a blow to his pride, an affront to his status as commander. In his fury, he turned his wrath not against the Trojans but against Achilles, the one warrior whose glory rivaled his own. Agamemnon declared that if he must give up Chryseis, he would take another prize in compensation. And when Achilles challenged him, he threatened to seize Briseis, the woman Achilles had claimed. The insult struck like a spear. To Achilles, this was no mere matter of property or pride. In the brutal economy of the heroic age, honor was measured by the spoils one held, by the visible tokens of victory. To strip him of Briseis was to strip him of standing before all the army, to reduce him from greatest champion to dishonored vassal. Before the assembled chiefs, the quarrel exploded into fury. Achilles' words burned with contempt. He declared that he would no longer fight for Agamemnon, no longer spill his blood for a commander who insulted him. He even threatened to return home, abandoning the war entirely. Agamemnon, equally proud, carried out his threat. He sent his men to seize Briseis from Achilles' tent, parading his dominance before all. It was at this moment, stripped of honor, burning with rage, that Achilles made his fateful choice. He withdrew from battle, He swore that no Greek would see his spear on the field until the Trojans drove them back to their very ships. And then, in the solitude of his tent, he lifted his hands to the sky and prayed, not to Zeus for victory, but for defeat. He begged the king of gods to grant the Trojans strength, to drive the Greeks into despair, so that Agamemnon and all the host would realize how much they depended on him. This is the true beginning of the Iliad, not the fall of Troy, not the duel of champions, but the wrath of one man, a wrath so profound it unravels the fortunes of nations. Homer does not open with glory, but with anger. The first word of the poem in Greek is menis, a word used almost exclusively of divine wrath, the fury of gods. To apply it to Achilles is to suggest something more than human, something dangerous, cosmic, consuming. And so the Greeks faltered. Without Achilles, their greatest champion, they fought at a disadvantage. The Trojans, heartened by his absence, pressed forward. Hector, prince of Troy, shone with valor, driving the Greeks back, threatening even their ships. The war, which had seemed locked in stalemate for years, suddenly shifted. And all the while, Achilles sat apart, nursing his wounded pride, watching as the prophecy he had invoked came true. This episode is more than a quarrel between two men. It is a clash of values. For Agamemnon, kingship and authority demanded obedience, even if it meant humiliating his greatest warrior. For Achilles, honor and respect were paramount, greater even than duty to the cause. The Greeks believed that without honor, a man was nothing. And so Achilles chose withdrawal, even if it meant the ruin of his comrades. To modern eyes, his choice may seem selfish, destructive, but to the Greeks it was the inevitable result of insult, the only path open to a man of his stature. Yet the wrath of Achilles was not only pride, it was also a wound of the heart. For Briseis, though taken as a prize, was not merely property to him. Later in the poem, when she returns to him, she speaks with affection and grief, mourning Patroclus as if he were her own husband. In her words, we glimpse that she and Achilles shared a bond deeper than the brutal exchange of captives. To lose her, and in such a way, was not only a public humiliation, but a private pain. The gods, too, were drawn into this storm. Thetis, hearing her son's grief, rose from the sea to comfort him. He told her of the insult, of his vow never to fight again. She, aching with a mother's love, ascended to Olympus and clasped the knees of Zeus himself. She begged him to grant victory to the Trojans until the Greeks came crawling back to her son. Zeus, reluctant but bound by her plea, nodded his assent. And so the scales of war tilted, not by the clash of armies alone, but by the prayer of one grieving hero. The wrath of Achilles, then, is not a single act of anger but a force that shapes the entire course of the war. It begins with an insult, but it extends to divine petition, to withdrawal, to a prayer for the ruin of his own people. It is both personal and cosmic, the wrath of a man and the wrath of a demigod. It is destructive, but it is also transformative, for out of this wrath will come grief, reconciliation, and ultimately the most enduring scenes of the Iliad. For now, though, Achilles remained in his tent, apart, silent, watching. The Greeks suffered without him as he had prayed they would. The Trojans pressed closer, and Hector's star rose. The stage was set for the war's darkest moment. Not yet the death of Troy, not yet the death of Achilles, but the death of the one he loved most, the event that would turn wrath into devastation and grief into fire. As the 10th year of the Trojan War wore on, the Greeks were faltering. Without Achilles on the battlefield, the tide had turned in favor of the Trojans. Their walls, once under siege, now held firm. Their forces, invigorated by victory, pressed closer to the Greek ships, threatening to burn the fleet and scatter the army. Each day that passed without Achilles fighting was a day of mounting peril, and each day weighed heavier on the heart of the man who had chosen wrath over duty. It was Patroclus, Achilles' closest companion, who first acted. Where Achilles was proud and stubborn, Patroclus was compassionate and wise. He understood both the stakes of the war and the torment of his friend. Watching the Greeks suffer, seeing the men he had fought beside now wounded and dying, he felt an urgent need to act. And so, in a decision born of courage, desperation, and love, he approached Achilles in the tent of the Myrmidons. "Brother," Patroclus said, his voice calm yet resolute, "the men are being destroyed. Our friends, our comrades, if you do not act, they will perish. Grant me your armor. Let me go to battle in your stead, that the Trojans may learn what it means to face you, even if you do not come yourself." Achilles' initial reaction was hesitation. He had sworn under the weight of insult not to lift a spear until Agamemnon's pride was humbled, until the Greeks understood their dependence on him. But Patroclus's words struck a chord. He was not merely asking to fight. He was invoking the bond between them, the closeness of their lives, the mutual loyalty that transcended glory and wrath. With a heavy heart, Achilles relented. He entrusted his armor to Patroclus, warning him, "Do not pursue the Trojans to the walls of Troy. Stay clear of Hector. Bring our people relief, but do not tempt fate." Patroclus donned the golden armor of Achilles, a gleaming symbol of his friend's power. When he stepped onto the battlefield, the Trojans were deceived. They believed Achilles himself had returned to the fight, and terror rippled through their ranks. The Greeks rallied behind this illusion, their courage renewed. Patroclus charged, driving the Trojans back, striking down foes with skill and valor, his actions indistinguishable from the wrathful demigod whose image he wore. But fate is relentless. The gods themselves watched the unfolding events with keen interest. Apollo, protector of Troy, sought to intervene. He struck Patroclus with divine guidance, giving strength to the Trojans and turning the tide against him. As Patroclus pressed forward, he found himself confronted by Hector, prince of Troy, and by the combined might of Trojan warriors. In the clash that followed, Patroclus fought with the courage of Achilles, but he was not Achilles. He lacked the singular destiny that shaped every move of the son of Thetis. The duel with Hector was swift and devastating. Patroclus struck and parried, but his movements were mortal, subject to the limits of flesh and bone. Hector, guided by Apollo, found the opening. He thrust his spear, piercing Patroclus in armor and ending the life of the man who had dared to bear Achilles' name. The battlefield, once filled with the illusion of Achilles' presence, was now consumed by horror. When the news reached Achilles, grief overwhelmed wrath. The Myrmidons, though loyal, could not console him. He tore his hair, struck the ground, and wailed in a voice that echoed across the ships. His tears mingled with the dust of the battlefield, a river of sorrow flowing from a heart already heavy with pride and prophecy. Patroclus was not merely a companion. He was a mirror of Achilles' own humanity, a reflection of love, loyalty, and the bonds that made a man more than a weapon. To lose him was to confront the fragility of life itself. In the grief that followed, Achilles' wrath transformed. No longer directed inward, nor constrained by pride, it now burned outward, a fire ready to consume Troy. He made a solemn vow. Hector would pay with his life, and the Trojans would witness the full fury of a man who had lost everything dear. In this moment, Achilles became more than mortal anger. He became a force of destiny, a living instrument of vengeance, a hero whose grief was inseparable from his power. The death of Patroclus also revealed the intricate interplay of gods and men in the Greek imagination. Apollo had guided Hector's spear, yet the mortals themselves were not powerless. Achilles' mother Thetis heard her son's cries and once more ascended to Olympus, petitioning Hephaestus, god of fire and craftsmanship, to forge a new set of armor for her son. This divine intervention was emblematic of Achilles' unique status. He was mortal in body, divine in blood, and entwined with the fates of gods as much as men. Thus, Patroclus's fate was both tragedy and catalyst. His death ended the illusion of victory for the Greeks, revealed the vulnerability of Achilles' closest companion, and ignited a rage that would change the course of the war. It was the human cost of heroism laid bare, the bonds between men, the weight of loyalty, and the relentless pull of destiny that no mortal, however strong, could escape. Grief and rage consumed Achilles as he mourned Patroclus. His sorrow was not quiet or private. It erupted in a voice that shook the Myrmidons, the ships of Greece, and even the heavens themselves. The battlefield had taken from him the one person who could temper his fury, who could share the weight of destiny. And in that absence, a transformation occurred. The pride that had led him to withdraw from battle now merged with the grief that pierced his heart, forging a wrath greater than any warrior had ever known. Thetis, hearing the cries of her son, once more rose from the sea. She came not as a mother in comfort, but as a guide to vengeance. She ascended to Olympus, her voice imploring Hephaestus, the god of fire and craftsmanship, to forge new armor for Achilles, armor worthy of a hero whose fury would soon eclipse legend. In the glowing halls of the forge, Hephaestus labored. He shaped a breastplate stronger than the mightiest shield, a helmet that gleamed like the sun greaves to match the perfection of Achilles' stride, and a shield unlike any other depicting the cosmos itself. The earth, the heavens, the cities at peace and in war, the cycles of life and death, the eternal balance of humanity and divine will. With this divine armor, Achilles stepped once more into the world of men, a figure transformed, no longer merely a warrior. He was the embodiment of wrath, grief, and destiny combined. His return to battle was both terrifying and magnificent. The Trojans, who had grown bold in his absence, now faced the full force of a hero unbound. His chariot, drawn by immortal horses, thundered across the plains. Spears, swords, and shields alike could scarcely withstand the fury he unleashed. The ground itself seemed to tremble beneath his charge, and the very air carried the sound of his wrath. Hector, Prince of Troy and the city's greatest champion, emerged to meet him. Their duel was not simply a contest of skill, but a collision of fates, a struggle in which the weight of prophecy, grief, and pride converged. Achilles' strikes were precise, deadly, and inexorable. Hector fought with courage with the hopes of Troy upon him, yet he was no match for the fury of a man avenging his closest companion. Each parry, each thrust, each movement of Achilles carried not only skill, but the relentless momentum of grief, transformed into rage. The duel ended with Hector's death, an event that has echoed through the millennia as one of the most dramatic moments of Greek mythology. Achilles' victory was complete, yet it was not simple triumph. In his grief, he desecrated the body of Hector, dragging it behind his chariot, denying the Trojans the burial rites that were sacred in their culture. This act of vengeance was a turning point, both morally and narratively, for it revealed the depths of Achilles' wrath and the devastating consequences of a hero consumed by grief. Even in this act of fury, however, glimpses of humanity persisted. Achilles' actions were not mindless cruelty. They were expressions of love for Patroclus, proof that the bonds between men could drive deeds of unimaginable consequence. In desecrating Hector's body, he honored his friend's memory, channeling sorrow into an outward force so vast it reshaped the war itself. And yet, the Greeks themselves were uneasy. Even among those who revered him, some whispered that his wrath had exceeded the bounds of honor, that vengeance, no matter how righteous, carries its own cost. The gods, ever watchful, continued their subtle interventions. Apollo, who had guided Hector's spear, could not prevent the prince's death, but he ensured that Achilles himself would not remain unscathed. The tension between divine will and human agency remained, a reminder that Achilles, for all his might and demigod blood, was still subject to the decrees of fate. In the aftermath of Hector's death, Achilles' grief and rage began to intersect with reflection. The desecration of the body, while an act of vengeance, planted seeds of conscience that would later bloom when King Priam came to him. Priam, father of Hector, arrived in the Greek camp under the cover of night, guided by courage and desperation. Alone, he approached the hero, begging for the return of his son's body, offering ransom and appealing to shared humanity. In this encounter, Achilles displayed the duality that defined him, the ability to rage beyond reason, and yet the capacity for empathy that marks the greatest heroes. He listened, he wept, and he returned Hector's body, allowing the Trojans the burial rites denied in anger. This moment, tender and human, stands as one of the most profound scenes in myth, a testament to the complexity of Achilles' character. The return to battle, therefore, was more than revenge. It was the full expression of the hero's path. Grief, love, pride, and destiny converged to create a figure whose presence on the battlefield was both destructive and transformative. Achilles was no longer merely a warrior among men. He had become the embodiment of the human struggle against fate, a living testament to the intertwined nature of loss and power, of mortality and glory. In the larger context of the war, Achilles' return reshaped the narrative. The Trojans, who had pressed forward with confidence, now recoiled. Greek morale surged once more, yet the cost of the wrath that had restored it was clear. Achilles' deeds had tipped the scales, but they had also sown the seeds of reflection, questioning, and the recognition that even the greatest hero is bound by grief, bound by love, and ultimately bound by the fragile threads of mortality. Thus the chapter of rage, death, and vengeance gave way to the next inevitable step in the saga, the final fulfillment of prophecy, the death of Achilles himself. The stages were set. The war, so long defined by human skill and divine interference, now moved inexorably toward the ultimate confrontation with fate. The hero whose wrath had reshaped the battlefield would soon confront the vulnerability that had always been his alone. The heel, the prophecy, and the mortality that even gods could not alter. Even as Achilles returned triumphantly to the battlefield, even as his wrath and skill had reshaped the fate of Troy, the shadow of prophecy loomed over him, as inevitable and silent as the tide. For all his victories, all his divine armor, and all his unmatched prowess, Achilles could not escape the truth that had been whispered to him since birth. He was mortal, his life bound by fate, and the price of glory would be death. The world's greatest warrior, it seemed, had been destined to fall, not in some distant, abstract battle, but in the hands of forces both human and divine. The story of his death is one that blends heroism, chance, and the intervention of gods. Paris, Prince of Troy, often portrayed as lesser in skill and courage than Hector or Achilles, became the instrument of destiny. Guided by Apollo, who sought to protect Troy and avenge Hector, Paris took aim with a bow, a weapon that required neither the strength of Achilles nor the ferocity of the Myrmidons. In the chaos of battle, he released the arrow that would fulfill the prophecy, striking Achilles in the one vulnerable spot that remained untouched by the river Styx or any mortal shield, his heel. Some versions of the myth emphasize the symbolic weight of this moment. The heel, small and exposed, represents the fragility inherent in even the greatest heroes. It is the reminder that mortality cannot be escaped, that every man, no matter how mighty, carries a weakness. To the Greeks it was a cautionary tale, that pride, valor, and divine blood do not render one invincible. Achilles' death, therefore, was not a failure, but a fulfillment of destiny, the final act in a life written long before he drew his first breath. When the arrow struck, the battlefield seemed to still. The mightiest of warriors, the terror of Troy, the friend and avenger, fell. His fall was not silent. Homer and later poets describe it as a moment of cosmic significance, a pause in the ongoing chaos of war. The Trojans, astonished, witnessed the collapse of their greatest adversary, yet they too knew the cost of killing a hero whose name would echo forever. Achilles' death did not end the war, but it altered its course irreversibly. The aftermath of his death was marked by mourning and ritual. The Greeks, who had once quarreled over Briseis and the pride of kings, now faced the loss of their greatest champion. His body was honored with elaborate rites, his funeral pyre lit with the grandeur befitting a demigod. Patroclus, whose death had spurred Achilles' wrath, was laid alongside him, a union in death that mirrored their deep bond in life. The Myrmidons, his loyal followers, wept as they cremated him, recognizing that no living warrior could ever match the fury and skill of their fallen leader. Yet even in death, Achilles' story did not end. The myths diverge here, offering glimpses of the afterlife and the continued influence of the hero. In some traditions, his spirit joins the Isles of the Blessed, a place where favored mortals dwell in peace among the divine. In others, he is visited by souls of fallen warriors, a reminder that the influence of heroes transcends mortal time. Some post-Homeric stories suggest marriage to Medea or other adventures, illustrating how later generations sought to expand and explore the life of the man who had captivated imagination across centuries. Achilles' death also casts light on the Greek understanding of heroism. It underscores that glory and mortality are intertwined, that the pursuit of eternal fame carries a price that cannot be evaded. To die young and celebrated was to secure a name that would endure beyond the limits of the body. Achilles' life and death thus became a model for heroism, not merely in physical prowess, but in the courage to embrace destiny fully, however brief the span of years. Even centuries later, this moment resonated. Roman poets, medieval chroniclers, and modern storytellers alike returned to the image of Achilles, arrow in heel, falling upon the sands of Troy. The simplicity of the arrow, guided by divine hand, striking the one point of vulnerability, became a metaphor for fate's impartiality and the fragility underlying even the most brilliant existence. The death of Achilles also illustrates the inescapable interplay between gods and men. Apollo's hand was decisive, yet Paris's choice, however guided, was crucial. The hero's mortality intersected with divine will, a constant reminder that in the Greek worldview, destiny and choice are intertwined. No skill, no armor, no wisdom can entirely remove the inevitability of fate. Achilles' end was both personal and cosmic, a moment of profound loss and mythic resonance. Thus the war continued, but the stage had shifted. Troy had lost its greatest adversary, the Greeks had lost their champion, and the echo of Achilles' life would shape every subsequent tale of the war. In Homer's epic, his death is not merely a historical note. It is a lens through which the nature of heroism, mortality, and divine human interplay is revealed. The hero, whose wrath had shaped the battlefield, now rests, his story complete yet immortal in memory. Even after the death of Achilles on the plains of Troy, his story did not end with the ashes of his pyre. In the centuries that followed, poets, storytellers, and historians continued to weave his legend, exploring paths that Homer had left untouched, imagining lives, loves, and deeds that extended beyond the Iliad. These post-Homeric myths reveal a hero whose influence reached far beyond the battlefield, whose presence shaped the imagination of civilizations long after Troy itself had crumbled. One of the most enduring threads in these later tales is the question of Achilles' life after death. Some traditions hold that in the Isles of the Blessed, he lived alongside other favored heroes, free from the ravages of mortality, but still retaining the essence of the warrior. There, he and Patroclus were reunited, a companionship preserved in eternity. The Greek vision of the afterlife was complex. It allowed the greatest of mortals to enjoy a kind of immortality that was both symbolic and literal, a reward for deeds that had transcended human limits. In these islands, Achilles was no longer a mortal torn between pride and grief. He was a figure of eternal renown, a hero whose story could be remembered without the shadow of death. Other post-Homeric accounts explore what Achilles' life might have been had he survived Troy. Some traditions suggest that he married Medea, the sorceress and princess of Colchis, renowned for her knowledge of magic and the arts of prophecy. In these tales, Achilles' union with Medea is both romantic and mystical, intertwining his heroic nature with the supernatural in ways that amplify the legendary scope of his life. Though these stories diverge from the canonical Iliad, they illustrate how later generations sought to expand his myth, imagining him not just as a warrior, but as a figure whose influence extended into realms beyond the mortal world. Achilles' post-Homeric presence also appears in Roman literature. Virgil in the Aeneid references the Greek hero as a benchmark of martial excellence, a name that casts long shadows over the Trojans and the world they inhabit. In these works, Achilles is not merely a figure of vengeance or wrath but an archetype, the ultimate warrior, whose brilliance, anger, and mortality illuminate the human experience. His story serves as both inspiration and warning, reminding mortals and demigods alike of the cost of glory and the inevitability of fate. Other tales emphasize alternate aspects of his character. Some describe Achilles as a teacher and progenitor, passing on his wisdom and skill to Neoptolemus, his son, who would later join the final battles of Troy. In these stories, Achilles' influence extends across generations, his bloodline and teachings shaping the outcome of wars he could no longer fight himself. In this sense, the hero becomes both a personal and cultural touchstone, a figure whose shadow guides the deeds of those who follow. In addition, Achilles' legend was not confined to heroic deeds alone. Poets and dramatists explored his temperament, his relationships, and the dualities that defined him. His bond with Patroclus, celebrated in life and preserved in myth, became a symbol of loyalty and love, a template for human relationships that transcends mere friendship. Briseis, the woman whose seizure sparked the initial wrath, is reimagined in various accounts as a figure of affection, mourning, and reconciliation. These stories reveal a hero whose humanity, his grief, his loyalty, his love, was as central to his identity as his skill with spear and sword. The influence of Achilles in post-Homeric myth also extends to philosophy and moral reflection. Later writers, including Plato, Aristophanes, and Roman thinkers, pondered the nature of heroism embodied by Achilles. Was he merely a warrior of unparalleled skill, or did he embody a deeper truth about the human condition? His life, full of passion, anger, and inevitable mortality, became a lens through which thinkers explored the balance between honor, pride, duty, and emotion. Achilles in these reflections is more than a character. He is an exemplar, a symbol of the tension between human desire and the inexorable march of fate. Even visual culture preserved and expanded his myth. Ancient vase paintings, sculptures, and mosaics depict him in moments of heroism, grief, and death, often highlighting his vulnerability alongside his might. Artists were drawn to the drama of his story, the duel with Hector, the grief for Patroclus, the fatal arrow to his heel. These images reinforced the narrative, ensuring that Achilles remained a central figure in the collective memory of the Mediterranean world, long after the Iliad was first sung aloud. The enduring fascination with Achilles in all these post-Homeric accounts lies in his complexity. He is at once demigod and mortal, wrathful and compassionate, destructive and tender. His narrative accommodates multiple layers of meaning: a hero of battlefield valor, a figure of tragic destiny, and a reflection of human emotion and moral struggle. This multidimensionality allowed later generations to adapt his story to their own cultural and philosophical needs, making him not merely a character of myth, but a symbol whose resonance transcended time and place. Even today, Achilles' post-Homeric influence persists. Literature, theater, film, and art continue to explore his story, often focusing on the aspects of pride, mortality, and the consequences of wrath. He has become an archetype, a figure whose narrative is both cautionary and aspirational, whose life exemplifies the limits and possibilities inherent in every human endeavor. Thus, the myths beyond Homer reveal that Achilles' story was never static. It evolved, expanded, and endured because it captured fundamental truths about heroism, mortality, and the human heart. His life, death, and legacy transcended the battlefield, entering the moral, cultural, and artistic imagination of civilizations for millennia. The war that took him, the companions he loved, the enemies he struck down, all became threads in a tapestry that continues to inspire, challenge, and resonate with audiences even in the modern era. The story of Achilles does not end with his death, nor with the myths that followed. His life, wrath, and deeds left a legacy that transcends the sands of Troy, echoing across centuries, influencing rulers, poets, artists, and thinkers alike. Achilles embodies the paradox of heroism, the pursuit of eternal glory through acts of mortal risk, the blending of divine blood with human frailty, the triumphs and tragedies that shape legend itself. From the moment of his birth, Achilles' fate was entwined with destiny. He chose a short life of renown over a long life of obscurity, and in doing so he became a template for heroism in the Greek imagination. To the Greeks, he represented the ultimate ideal, swift-footed, mighty, brilliant in battle, yet profoundly human in emotion. His story is not simply one of victory and death. It is a meditation on the human condition, on pride, loyalty, love, grief, and the inexorable pull of fate. These elements made Achilles timeless. Even great leaders of history drew inspiration from him. Alexander the Great, centuries later, revered Achilles as the paragon of martial prowess and heroic courage. It is said that he kept a copy of Homer's Iliad with him on his campaigns, envisioning himself in the footsteps of Achilles, emulating his bravery, his boldness, and even his temperament. The young conqueror saw in Achilles not merely a warrior, but an ideal, the blending of courage, skill, and destiny that could define a life and a legacy. In art, literature, and performance, Achilles' influence continued unabated. From the tragedies of Euripides to the epic poems of Roman authors, he has been a constant presence. Painters captured him in moments of heroism and grief. Sculptors immortalized his form in bronze and marble. Poets immortalized his deeds in song and verse. The dualities of his nature, wrath and loyalty, pride and compassion, mortality and demigod strength, made him endlessly compelling. His story invites audiences to explore the human experience, not only in acts of courage, but in the ethical and emotional choices that define heroism. Modern culture, too, has embraced Achilles. Literature, cinema, and theater have retold his story, emphasizing different aspects of his character. Some focus on the rage that defined him, others on the love he bore Patroclus, still others on his vulnerability, symbolized by the heel that became a metaphor for the fragility inherent in even the strongest individuals. His story continues to serve as a mirror for contemporary audiences, reflecting themes of ambition, honor, mortality, and the cost of glory. Beyond artistic representation, Achilles' legacy is philosophical. He raises enduring questions about the nature of excellence in human striving. Can true heroism exist without risk? Does the pursuit of renown justify the sacrifices demanded by fate? How does one balance personal emotion with duty to others? Achilles' life and death suggest that heroism is inseparable from mortality, that glory is intertwined with vulnerability, and that the human spirit, while fleeting, can leave an indelible mark upon the world. His enduring symbol also extends to moral reflection. The wrath of Achilles, often seen as destructive, can also be interpreted as a necessary force, a response to injustice, a measure of loyalty, a catalyst for action when circumstances demand decisive courage. His grief over Patroclus illuminates the depths of human attachment, reminding us that even the mightiest among us are moved by love, loss, and loyalty. In both his victories and his failings, Achilles offers a blueprint for understanding human greatness and human frailty simultaneously. In the end, Achilles is remembered not only for what he did on the battlefield, but for what he represents across time. He is the embodiment of heroic ideal and tragic consequence of divine favor and human limitation. The stories that follow him, from Homer to modern retellings, serve to remind us that heroism is never simple. It is forged in fire and shadow, in triumph and grief, in the delicate balance between action and consequence. As the centuries pass, Achilles continues to inhabit the imagination. He is a figure of awe, a cautionary tale, and a source of inspiration. His name evokes not just the might of the Myrmidons or the fury of war, but the universal struggle of mortality and legacy, of desire and destiny. Across literature, philosophy, and art, he endures as a touchstone for understanding courage, pride, love, and the human cost of greatness. And so, the tale of Achilles comes full circle, from the hidden child of Thetis and Peleus, to the warrior trained by Chiron, to the hero whose wrath altered the course of Troy, to the demigod who fell by the hand of fate, and finally to the enduring symbol of glory and mortality. His story resonates because it captures the essence of what it means to strive, to love, to rage, and to leave a mark upon the world. His life reminds us that immortality is found not in the length of days, but in the impact of deeds, the depth of bonds, and the stories that survive to speak of us long after we are gone. Achilles' legacy is, therefore, eternal. The wrathful hero, the grieving friend, the unstoppable force, and the demigod whose name continues to echo across time, a reminder of both human limitation and human possibility. In every retelling and every tribute, Achilles lives on, not merely as a warrior of Troy, but as a timeless emblem of courage, passion, and the enduring quest for meaning in the face of fate.